the SMERU Research Institute, host of Task Force 5 T20. It is my honor to chair today's session on Rethinking Inequality, Human Capital, and Well-being. Inequality, human capital, and well-being is a complex cross-cutting topic which become increasingly important as we have gone through the COVID-19 pandemic that has exacerbated poverty and vulnerability. Now, more than ever, around the end of the second year of the pandemic, we need to further rethink this inequality, human capital, and well-being issues. As the world is facing, we may need to reflect on our knowledge regarding these issues in order to fully capture how the pandemic has affected our lives and how we will address the challenge in the post-pandemic world. Our today's session highlights research and policy works on these areas presented by our distinguished speakers. During the session, we wish to learn from and be inspired by the extensive experience of our speakers who will share with us their perspectives on how to support and enable the strong, inclusive, and sustainable recovery together within G20 countries and beyond in the areas of inequality, human capital, and well-being. Ladies and gentlemen, we will start the session with the special notes from the lead co-chair of TF5 T20, Dr. Asep Suryahadi. Before listening to his speech, please allow me to introduce the keynote speaker briefly. Dr. Asep Suryahadi is the lead co-chair of Task Force 5 T20 and also Senior Research Fellow, the SMERU Research Institute. He served as SMERU's director previously, and he has been asked here, what are the main priorities for G20 to take actions, and what do we want to inform co-leaders within the G20 regarding inequality, human capital, and well-being? Pak Asep will highlight the main recommendations for G20 leaders to play critical roles to address new challenges through the multi-sectoral collaboration across developed and developing countries. Pak Asep, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Henny, for the kind introduction. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. In my notes, I would like to highlight the works of Task Force 5, which focuses on inequality, human capital, and well-being during the past 1 year. From the introduction, from the opening and various sessions yesterday, we know that during and after the pandemic, COVID-19 pandemic, we have witnessed increasing inequality, worsening human capital, and also decreasing people's welfare. Therefore, our aim is to reverse that. That is to reduce inequality, to improve human capital, and to increase well-being in the post-COVID-19 pandemic. And our approach or our intermediate objective is to achieve this goal is by making the economy more inclusive and people-centered. And to achieve this objective, we propose 3 strategies. Yeah. The first one is to establish a comprehensive, inclusive, and innovative social protection system to prepare for future works. Yeah. As we know from our experience during the several decades that the shock could come from various sources, from the financial market, from the labor market, from natural disaster, and the pandemic is from the health sector. So the shocks, the nature of the shock is very varied. Yeah. So we have to be prepared with that. The second strategy is we should enable accelerated and inclusive learning and skilling to achieve resilient education system and reap demographic dividends. Yeah. We have several problems in this area related with the, for example, youth unemployment, aging populations, and also obsolete skills, especially in the face of changing technology for the future work. Yeah. And the third strategy is we want to move beyond GDP as a prosperity measurement. For the social protection strategy, we propose two policy directions. Yeah. The first one is to develop shock responsive, inclusive, and resilient social protection systems. Again, as we know that the sources of the shocks could be varied, and also the nature of the shock could be varied, but also the people that we want to protect from the shocks could also vary. It depends on the level of income. It could different based on the employment type, etc. Therefore, we need to have a social protection system that is shock responsive. Yeah. It can easily adjust with the nature of the shock and the people that we want to target to protect. The second strategy, from our experience, also we learned that it is not that easy to implement or to deliver the benefits of social protection to the people that we want to protect. Yeah. In Indonesia, for example, in the past we had the Rice for the Poor program, and we have to deliver the rice to the people that we want to help. Yeah. And some of the people live in quite isolated places. So the cost of bringing the rice to the people could be much more expensive than the value of the rice itself. So we propose that we should leverage digital system for delivering the social assistance and financial inclusion to these people. This will help overcome the problem with the efficiency and effectiveness of the social protection system. Related to the learning and skilling strategy, we also propose two policy direction. One is by preparing a resilient education system for learning recovery and stronger collective futures. Yeah. During this pandemic, we learned that we suddenly cannot deliver education services as usual, and we have to change quickly from face-to-face learning to online learning. And the capacity of the education system to respond to these changes also varied actually. Even within countries, it's quite different. Yeah? In Indonesia, for example, we see quite heterogeneous responses in the regions. Yeah? In responding to these changes in the education services delivery. There are some quite good lesson learned from several regions where they can quickly adapt it with the online learning system. And it seems that the key is that we need to have close cooperation among the education stakeholders, including involving parents and the communities in delivering the new form of education. The second strategy is on investing in skill to reap the dividends from demographic transition. There are several issues in this area. The first one is, for example, related to the youth idleness and youth unemployment, which is quite large, especially in developing countries, including in Indonesia. And we need to understand more the reason behind this. Yeah. And also, many G20 countries have already have aging population. Some are in that direction. Yeah. But that also creates problems, yeah? Especially when the burden from this aging population become so high, so we need to prepare this aged population to reskill them in order for them to re-enter the labor market. Yeah. And finally, for the third strategy on the prosperity measurement, we need to integrate the well-being framework and multidimensional poverty into policy design and objectives. This last strategy has been discussed in depth and very extensively yesterday in the parallel session 2D, I believe. Yeah. So we will not discuss this strategy today, I think. Rather, we will focus on the first 4 strategies. I think that's end my notes today. Thank you and have a productive discussion.
Thank you, Pak Asep, for fascinating perspective about the important priorities for G20 countries leaders to address the challenge on equality, human capital, and well-being by reducing inequalities, improving human capital and well-being by more inclusive and people-centered. Now onto the panel discussion. Let me start by introducing all of our speakers who are with us this morning. We have here Dennis Görlich, the Program Manager, Socioeconomic Transformation, the New Institute, and Program Director, Global Solutions Initiative, Germany. Hello, Dennis. Welcome to Indonesia, and thank you for joining us this morning. Our second speaker is Ibu Vivi Alatas, CEO of Asakreativita and co-chair of Task Force 5 T20 Indonesia. Good morning, Bu Vivi. Thank you for joining us today. We also have Javier Luque, is it right? Javier Luque, country lead of the Global Partnership for Education, GPE. Hello, Javier. We are excited to listen from you today. And finally, we also have here Pak Elan Satriawan, Chief of Policy Team of the National Team for the Acceleration of Poverty Reduction, TNP2K, and co-chair of Task Force 5 T20. Thank you, Pak Elan, for joining our discussion today. Our speakers will have 15 minutes, and I hope if I could ask you for stick on time, because we aim to save the last 10 minutes for questions and answer session with our audience here and also with our audience who participate online. I would like also to encourage our online participants to actively engage with us by submitting your questions via Zoom chat box or YouTube comment session. The team will forward your question to me and I will pass them on to the speakers. And while doing so, please write down your name and affiliation. Ladies and gentlemen, I will start with our first speaker, Dennis Görlich. Dennis heads the program team at the Global Solutions Initiative and a program manager at the Hamburg-based Institute of Advanced Study, the New Institute. He is responsible for the work on the socio-economic transformation. Dennis holds a PhD in economics from the University of Kiel, Germany, and a master's degree in economics from Maastricht University, Netherlands. He previously headed the Global Challenge Center at the Kiel Institute for the World Economy, where he managed the T20 process during Germany's G20 presidency. He has done consulting projects for the German Ministry of Finance and OECD, and he was also co-chair of the T20 Task Force on the Digital Economy since 2017. His academic work focused on the changing organization of work, sustainability in global value chains, and the G20. Dennis is going to present Inequality and Well-being Trends Post-COVID-19 Pandemic. Dennis, I look forward to hearing your presentation. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much for that introduction. Can I be heard? Yeah, I can. So, first of all, I must say, Asep, I think this has been a fantastic work that you have been doing in this task force. And I also have to say I have to disappoint you a little bit, because I will speak just very briefly about well-being trends and the work we are doing in that regard, even though it has been addressed yesterday already. But this is an evolving agenda which I would like to present and also give an invitation to you later on. So maybe to start with inequality. Can we somehow skip to the next? Oh, now it works, okay. Inequality, as you know, is most often measured in terms of income or wealth. So these are the numbers that we usually know. So here's a figure that comes from the newest release of the World Inequality Report. And it shows in blue the between-country inequality. So how unequal is the world? Put it up. Okay. How unequal is the world? How unequal are the countries? While the red section shows within-country inequality. So inequality across various dimensions within a country, say inequality, education, income, etc. So what we can see from this graph, which stretches over a long time of 200 years, is that since around 1980, the world has in fact become more equal. So the between-country inequality in income has decreased quite strongly, while we have seen quite strong increases, in fact, in most countries in the world in within-country inequality. So income levels across the world have equalized, but within groups, within countries, inequalities have become stronger. And that goes for many dimensions that you look at: education groups, wealth quintiles, etc. Now, another figure that comes from the most recent World Inequality Report is the dynamics in the distribution of wealth gains across the past 25 years. And what you see at the x-axis here, the vertical axis, the horizontal axis, is the distribution of wealth across the entire world. So the very poorest persons are at the left end of that axis, while the richest people are on the right-hand side. And here you can see how the growth of wealth has changed over time, and this previous versions of that curve have been called the elephant curve. So you might be familiar with that, but you see that the highest income gains have in fact been increasingly concentrated in the very high income group. But also the middle class in the emerging world has witnessed some strong or significant wealth increases in the past 25 years. And interestingly, what you see is that there has been some squeezing in the lower and middle income groups in richer countries, which is where you see the dip in the graph. And an explanation for that that is often made is that we have seen, of course, processes of globalization and offshoring and redistribution of production across the world, which has led to significant displacement of routine activities in the rich countries. And so there have been, in fact, wealth and income losses for these people in these income groups, which are also reflected in this graph. But nevertheless, I mean, the big winners over the past 25 years are those who had a lot of wealth to begin with. So I would just briefly like to touch upon what else matters for well-being. Income and wealth are, of course, correlated with well-being. It's material gain that's important for our standard of living. But we would argue in our work that these are not the only indicators that matter for well-being. In fact, Dennis Noah, who has also been presenting at various panels here, and my colleague Catarina Lima de Miranda, they have started to develop what we coin the SAGE dashboard a few years ago, also in the context of the T20. And this SAGE dashboard, as we call it, is a normative framework of measures of prosperity that characterize well-being. So in detail, we look at solidarity, agency, material gain, that's growth as we have depicted it beforehand, and also environmental sustainability. So why is that? So if you look around the world and you ask like the normative question, what matters for your well-being, we can be quite sure that solidarity, so the question, how well are you embedded within your communities? Can you rely on friends and partners to support you in your life? This is what we measure with solidarity. This is quite important for well-being. And in fact, some would say that this is much more important than having a high income. I mean, of course, given that you can fulfill your existential needs, which is the most important thing, but beyond that, solidarity is probably something that matters a lot for well-being. And similarly, agency matters. So the question is, how well can you determine your own fate? Are you able to pursue goals that you set yourself, or are you completely constrained by a framework in which you cannot actually flourish yourself? Of course, as I've said, material gain, how rich am I, what can I afford, is important as well. And also important is how intact is the natural world around you. Can I live in harmony with nature, or does that actually stop me from doing things that I want to? So, and then of course people usually say, well, these things cannot really be measured, right? Because this is hard to measure. You can't measure solidarity across countries. And it's a big challenge, in fact, you know, to measure these indicators on a continuous basis currently, so not only 10 years back, but currently at this current point in time, and to do that in a harmonized fashion across various countries around the world. So what my colleagues there have been doing, sorry, I'm going a bit too quick, is basically a first start at looking at possible indicators, how this can be done. So they have collected these indicators for 150 countries in the world over the past couple of years. And all this can be read about in the work that they have published. But something I would like to mention here is an ongoing agenda, which is basically that we now start to look also at the distribution of solidarity within countries. Because after all, as you've seen before, the within dimension of inequality is one that is extremely important. Not only between countries is important, but more even so within what happens within countries. So here is something that comes out very freshly from the research that we have been doing, and that is the question, how is solidarity distributed by income quintile? And what you see here at the top is the richest group, the richest 20% in the G7 countries. So this is an analysis only currently for the G7 countries. So the richest 20% have a high inward solidarity measure, and it's almost the same for the upper income groups. But then you see a large difference, especially the poorest 20% are what we call solidarity poor. So they do not have a network of friends and partners that they can rely on, you know, to cope with life and situations here. And they are significantly below the solidarity levels of the richer parts of the population. And so, taking this into account, I think the policies that you have proposed in this task force are extremely relevant. Now, you can ask, well, this is something you have looked at in the G7 countries now, so I wonder if is this a global challenge? Well, the empirics for that are still outstanding. We don't have them currently. But I would say, yes, it clearly is a global challenge, and that is because we know from other research that cohesive and empowered societies, so those who are strong on solidarity, who are strong on agency, are in fact ready and prepared to manage crises like climate change, the pandemics, and so on. And there has been some evidence that countries who score highly on solidarity and agency are in fact those who have come better through the COVID pandemic than other countries. And these values are also important for managing the economic transformation that's ahead, the green transformation, which will cause many interruptions in things that we do currently. So having cohesive and empowered societies is a good prerequisite to deal with these challenges ahead. So what we urgently need to do is to develop policies that strengthen solidarity in particular and agency. And that doesn't mean that we necessarily have to distribute income from one group to another, but it means that we have to find instruments that can actually strengthen that. And this is beginning research, and this is why I would like to close briefly with an invitation also to everybody who here in the room and elsewhere who's working on concepts how solidarity agency can be strengthened, to work with us on a broader conception of prosperity and to find also policy instruments that can help in strengthening these important elements of well-being. So we have a program at the Global Solutions Initiative and the new institute where I'm based, where we can bring together researchers to work on this agenda. And I would be very keen to interact with those of you who are working on this. So these are my brief insights to begin with, and I look forward to learning more from the discussions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dennis, for your excellent talk on the trends of inequality and well-being post-COVID-19. I would like to highlight some of the most important takeaway points from your presentation. So inequality and well-being has assumed greater importance for G20 policy discussion during the COVID-19 crisis. Dennis highlighted this trend as shown in the income and wealth indicators, which are correlated with well-being, which include between and within country inequality, dynamics in the distribution of wealth gain, and also female labor income share on the world, if I'm not mistaken. And in addressing this challenge in inequality and well-being, our speaker recommend that we need to think beyond the conventional indicators and also looking at alternative frameworks such as what Dennis mentioned was SAGE, right? So it is solidarity, agency, material gain, and environmental sustainability. Dennis also proposed a very interesting proposal which you mentioned as the current work in progress to rethink the concept of prosperity, maybe beyond nationality, because we are human, no nationality. There is a lot of question within it, how we will achieve it. Dennis is also, what I like is, Dennis is optimistic about a cohesive and empowered societies are actually ready to manage crises like climate change, pandemic, and economic transformation. So having here this presentation from Dennis and the recommendation to develop policies that strengthen solidarity and agencies from our first speaker, I'm excited to hear another perspective related to how to address the challenge from the aspect of human capital, particularly in the skill aspect in the context of digital technology development. Now, I would like to invite our second speaker, Ibu Vivi Alatas, who will share her knowledge on a skilled human capital for sustainable recovery and growth. Ibu Vivi Alatas is the CEO of Asakreativita, and she is one of co-chairs of Task Force 5 Inequality, Human Capital and Wellbeing T20. Formerly, Ibu Vivi was a lead economist of World Bank, where she led a team of seasoned local and international economists in producing several flagship reports for national and global audience, including Targeting Poor and Vulnerable Households in Indonesia, Making Poverty Work in Indonesia, Indonesia's Rising Divide, Indonesia Job Report, and Aspiring Indonesia, Expanding the Middle Class. She has presented various of these research findings to high-level policymakers from Indonesia and several other countries. She also has written several journal papers on poverty, inequality, and labor issues. Some of the papers were written in collaboration with Nobel laureates Abhijit Banerjee and Angus Deaton, who was also her advisor in Princeton. Bu Vivi, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for a very kind introduction. What I would like to talk today is about winning the race between skill and technology. Can you please have my presentations? Yeah. Okay. So, digital technology is transforming the world. Ocean of big data, Internet of Things, and robotics are no longer just part of science fiction. The world is changing and create anxiety and hope. Should we worry? Can we expect much to gain? Who will benefit from this digital dividend? Will the large number of young new entrants to labor market in the coming years get the jobs? Will technology widen the gap between the rich and the poor? The pandemic has exacerbated the already high levels of idleness among youth. Youth idleness is defined as youth not being in school, not having a job, not looking for a job, not conducting training. For Indonesia, the rate is around above 20%. But if we look for female youth idleness, it's close to 38%. But this is not just the problem of Indonesia. More than 80 countries in the world have youth idleness above 20%. Another challenge is low labor force participation among female. The global female labor force participation is around 47%, while male is around 72%. So the difference is 25 percentage points. In some regions, the difference can be even above 50%. A key concern is the potential for automation to displace jobs, especially among workers performing routine tasks. We are facing a race between skills and technology. Unfortunately, countries might lose the race unless there is a significant awakening regarding the importance of upscaling and reskilling. Digital technology actually gives promises in addressing those skill issues. Digital technology over factor productions, better work. We can learn almost anything now. The challenge is creating user-friendly platform with local contents needed by the poor families and poor villages. Digital indeed gives promises, but we need to overcome those challenges so that it will not create winner-take-all phenomena. To win the race, education reform is imperative. Education and educational institutions, schools, universities, and other education institutions need to change in all dimensions regarding what, why, when, where, who, how education is carried on. Let me talk a little bit about all of those issues. Regarding why, education needs to aim to do more than just preparing young people for the world of work, but more about acquiring skills to become active, responsible, and engaged citizens. Across the world, Universities are still coping from the global pandemic. Even as campuses reopen, we need to accept that there will be no return to the pre-pandemic level. Even before COVID-19 crisis, the higher education already faced significant challenges. For example, in US, only 60% of college students actually earn a degree within 6 years. This is based on data in 2017. Aligned forces such as falling birth rates, pressures on affordability, the costs and benefits of digitization, and emerging new competitors push the current model of higher education into questions. There is also another question regarding the value of higher education. Survey from New America Higher Education Tracking Survey found nearly 2/3 of the respondents agreed with the statement, higher education is not worth the cost to students anymore. So regarding what skills are required to embrace the digital transformations? How will the education of the future look like? The central certainty is the uncertainty. The ability to adapt to these continuous and sometimes unpredictable changes is the most important threat one can have. Digital revolution is a data revolution. Not only Indonesia, but the world needs more data scientists, statisticians, econometricians who can make data tell stories and offer solutions. But the goal in the future is not making majority become data scientists. Digital literacy is more important skill for all. Digital literacy is the ability to live, learn, and work in a society where interaction and communications use digital technology. Students will need to apply their knowledge in unknown, evolving circumstances. For this, they will need a broad range of metacognitive skills, such as critical thinking, creative thinking, learning how to learn, self-regulation. Young people will need to adapt at handling tension, dilemmas, and trade-offs. Workers will need socio-behavioral skills in all occupations, such as teamwork, self-confidence, negotiation skill, anger management, self-expression. And those skills are not currently provided in most universities. Future education and schools are also no longer generalizing the needs of student or learner into one size or several size fits all approach. Future education will become more personalized training, adaptive to the needs and interests of each individual. Regarding where, no longer dominated by offline, but more anytime, anywhere, with possibility of blended mechanism. Opportunities for students from low-income families are also increasing because the cost can be much cheaper. No more monopoly power of higher education by university. Universities are just one category of a growing pool of knowledge that are easily accessible through digital platform. But of course, university is not just about knowledge dissemination. They also offer a lot more than that. We get the network from wonderful professors and wonderful colleagues being inspired, motivated through class discussion or after class discussion. But university needs to redesign the values of in-person and campus-based learner. Universities should focus on providing rich learning experiences for students, not just a place to get a degree. Universities should evolve into a hybrid model that delivers world-class, flexible, personalized training. There is a huge opportunity to partner with local institutions in emerging markets. They could use technology to do so at scale and at price point that is affordable locally. There are some already into that directions, but there are still a lot of room for improvement. Regarding how, gamification, hands-on immersion will give no chance to get bored. That's what we hope. Simulation could also give students ability to explore volcano eruption and the human cells, human brain from their desks. There is also potential of using metaverse and blockchain. Metaverse can be used as a tool to increase educational presence enable immersive learning, and increase class participation. Blockchain can also be and has been used for learning records in a trusted and distributed manners. Regarding who, the power balance has most likely shifted from college to the student. Students are in the driver's seat. No students have more options and flexibility. There is a changing role for university. University will need to understand what the current student needs and develop a course curriculum that caters to a career-driven education, a life learning approach. Their role will be more important to become facilitator, coach, advisor. And there is also a variety of choices. University no longer have a monopoly of accreditation and non-degree credential. Many digital learning providers, employer schemes, and industry bodies compete with university. Regarding when, it is no longer predominantly during the first 25 years of your life, but continuous learning throughout the lifetime using short tailored training courses and learning by doing. As people will have to move from one job to another job, the need of upscaling and rescaling becomes more important. And universities can play this role by providing short, tailored adult training courses which teach people by doing. Of course, there is a need of more collaboration with private sector, should make their course, especially including adult learning courses, more relevant to employers by redesigning their curriculum. We are seeking more and more a shift toward lifelong learning, micro-credential, just-in-time learning. This will allow employees to gain the skill they need over time without having to invest in a degree. So imagine in the future, hopefully not so far away future, a student in Flores has access to the same quality of education as those in developed countries, like the US or the UK, without having to move abroad. She studies on a self-learner, remote basis using state-of-the-art technology, learning and behavioral management system that over-personalized, adaptive, gamified, and simulation approach. She occasionally visits the local campus for supplemental classes, group works with her peers. She graduates with globally recognized and valued certification. You may say I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one though. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bu Vivi, for your comprehensive explanation on the raising between skills and technology. Our speaker has discussed a very important point about the importance of skills to embrace digital transformation. Bu Vivi also envisioned five aspects of future education, for example, related to data revolution, digital literacy, metacognitive skill, adaptive personalized training, etc. But firstly, Bu Vivi underlined the issues of the high levels of idleness among youth, not being in school, not having work, not looking or preparing for a job, or not conducting training, which was exacerbated by the pandemic. And I was fascinated by Bu Vivi's recommendation about how education and educational institutions need to change in all dimensions, so that the goal, I think, is not just about preparing young people for the world of work, but more about acquiring skill as well to become the active, responsible, and engaged citizen. And I like your final dream and envision of the future when we imagine when everyone had access to the same quality of education, no matter whether they live in a remote place or in a developed countries with more developed countries. We can dream about the same quality education that can be accessed by everyone. Thank you, Bu Vivi, for your comprehensive analysis on that. I would like then next to invite our third speaker, Javier Luque from the Global Partnership for Education, who will elaborate another aspect of human capital, as the pandemic has significantly impacted the education sector. Dr. Luque is currently the country team lead for Indonesia and some other countries at Global Partnership for Education. Prior to working at GPE, he has held several positions at the World Bank, Inter-American Development Bank, and International Monetary Fund, as well as in the government of Peru. He has been a member of the board of development-related organization. Dr. Luque is also affiliated at the Catholic University of Peru. He has authored several journal articles, book chapters, and books on education and labor policy. He holds a PhD in economics from the University of Rochester and a master in economics from the University of Rochester and a master in commerce from the Victoria University at Wellington. Javier Luque will discuss accelerating education recovery to achieve inclusive quality learning. Javier, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and let me start by thanking the organizer for this opportunity to be here today with you in beautiful Bali. And of course, it's great to be presenting after my former colleague, Dr. Vivi Alatas, that I learned a lot from her when I was spending some time here at the World Bank. And actually, my presentation really fits with her in terms of how the education system fits in here. Now, Vivi was talking about universities, skills, like most of the focus on the labor market, and I will talk a little bit of how we prepare students to be there. No, and more specifically, what has been the impact of the COVID pandemic to get the students that Vivi was talking about, to make sure that they are not idle, that they are ready for the labor market, and as we will see, the situation doesn't look that good unless we take action, the G20 takes action. So let me start. Okay, so let me start by providing some eye-opening statistics on what has been the impact of the COVID pandemic on the education system. Now, of course, all this is preliminary because we are just starting to get data on what really happened. No, and on what has been the impact on kids and what will be the impact as they get later on into university or into the labor market. Many of these estimates come from the World Bank, UNICEF, and UNESCO. So the World Bank has estimated that the generation of school students affected by the pandemic, so the kids between grades, in K-12, we lost approximately $17 trillion of their lifetime income. And at the same time, when this, of course, the impact, this is the impact on their own income, but other authors have estimated the impact on the overall economic. And Hanushek, for example, has estimated for the OECD that the impact in the next 80 years will be a decrease in the GDP per capita, in the GDP of the countries around the world of 1.5%. No, so this is massive. 80 years, lower GDP of 80%. Of course, this is average. And I think the key point here is that we are not seeing this impact now. We will see this impact as kids grow, as they get into the labor market. So the full impact will happen maybe in 20 or 30 years unless we take action now. A similar statistic also produced by the World Bank is that the number of kids that cannot read a simple text has increased from 50 to 70%. The World Bank called this indicator learning poverty, but it's quite striking, no? And again, if these kids, and of course this reminds us that we in the education system were already in a crisis, no? But going from 50 from 70 indicates that the crisis has really gotten worse. And of course, this is cumulative, as the education system is cumulative, so this larger share of students that cannot read at the end of primary maybe will not fare as good as they would have done otherwise in secondary education and later at university. Then we also observe an increase in the number of out-of-school children, and so many kids have not come back, or many of those that are coming back, they just drop out the education system very fast. Then we also have seen that this is estimates from UNICEF that 13 million of girls has been forced or could have been forced into early marriage. And related to this, we also know that girls and females have been exposed to higher violence at home and during the COVID pandemic. And maybe related to the first presentation, we observed that that there is a potential for growing inequality as the impact of the COVID crisis on lower socioeconomic groups has been stronger. No, so as they prepare for the labor market, we expect that this different impact also tends to increase the income inequality. Another impact is that, of course, many kids, especially in developing, many kids, the low social economic conditions, and a lot of kids in developing countries receive school meals. So not going to school likely have affected, that for these kids, not going to school meant that probably they were not having lunch at home, and that also meant that they are at higher risk of being stunted. And at a macro level, and in terms of opportunities to education system now, what we observe is in many lower and middle income countries, the resources allocated to education are going down, and that's likely, unless we take action again, going to remain there as countries now are, of course, facing the current global economic crisis, but also taking into account that many have incurred in debts to overcome the crisis of COVID in the past 2 years. And related to this, there's also some trend on the decline on the aid going to education. So, now you can say, Javier, but the crisis is over and kids are going back to school, no? So first of all, let me emphasize, I just mentioned the learning loss, and let me emphasize that the learning loss is real, no? And it's not that kids are going back to school and we can do learning, we can do business as usual, no? The situation has really changed, and we need to be sure that the education system takes into account that and really faces a new situation at the same time that they prepare for the new normal. And let me present in this slide the evolution of the NAEP test in the US. This NAEP test in the US is quite useful because it allows us to see the evolution of learning in the US for a long period of time. And first of all, we verified that in the US from 2020 to 2022, the score in the NAEP test has decreased, and is the largest decrease represented in 1 year. So, okay, this is Javier, you are providing another evidence of the learning loss. But also it's important to see how the score that the US has now, this 234, is equivalent to the score that they have like 30 years ago. No, so the gains that that education system made have been wiped out by the crisis. And of course, this is not only happening in the US. We have similar evidence from Brazil, and if we will I'm sure if we will be able to measure this in other countries, we will get similar resources. Similar results. So the problem is there. The problem is huge. And what this tells us is also like, when kids come back to school, teacher has to be prepared for this. Teacher has to be ready to teach kids as they come back at the right level. No? So teachers have to take into account where kids are and don't start just moving into the next grade contents because probably students will fail. Also, one pattern that we are observing is that higher student and teacher absenteeism rates. No? So this, and of course, this is related to the impact on their habits and the higher formation in their routines that the crisis has, especially in the case of students. And of course, on teachers, it can be also related to that, but also that they are overburdened by the current situation at the school system. And on the macro level, the problem that we are observing also is that the education system may not be prioritized in the national budgets, in the policy discussion, and of course that will affect the capacity of the education system to face the current challenges. And as I mentioned before, we know that inequality may increase even within classrooms. No, so it's important that teachers take differentiated approaches within the classroom to reduce that inequality, and of course, school principals and school education officials take measures to reduce inequality across classroom or across schools. And the second part of the slide is when I mentioned this addressing transitions, and actually relates a lot what Vivi was saying is what has happened with. So I just talked about kids that are in school and that remain in school. But what has happened with kids that were just in that transition, that were we were finalizing high school in 2020 or in 2021. Have they got into university when they should have? Have they got into the labor market when they should have? No, and actually it's hard to get information on that, but these graphs come from Google Trends, and in a way relates identifies the interest of these topics among population, and this will be a proxy for the population that were in the transition. So we see that a sharp decline in the number of times people search for the word university, and a sharp decline for the time people search for the word entry-level job. No, so that means that this may be a proxy that kids were less likely to make the transition in 2020, 2021, and less likely to make the transition into occupation also during that period. No? And of course, these have consequences. These have consequences in case of those that were going to the university, they lost that year, and those that they were going to the labor market, they lost that year of experience that they should have accumulated, and now that's gone. No? And these two things, of course, increase their human capital. So what are the recommendations for the new normal for the education sector? No, and of course this comes from several recommendations that are now there in the literature, and I would like to separate them between the short-term urgent ones to the medium-term and long-term to build a more resilient education system. In the short term, it's clear that first we assess the learning loss, and as I said, learning loss is something that is happening within that we have to identify the learning loss within the classroom, across classrooms in the school, across schools in the country. No, and so we have to assess the magnitude, find within a classroom where were the students that were not able to do their online learning during the COVID period. And also it's not important only to measure. No, sometimes economists, statistics, and econometricians, as mentioned by Vivi, like to measure a lot. No? But it's also important to address, not to take actions. They just don't get the data and stay there. And of course, we have to be really practical here. No? Their time was lost. We have to recuperate that time. And so that will mean some prioritization within these areas of the curriculum that the education system will like to focus to move fast. And of course, countries have to develop strategies to address these areas of curriculum, and of course, making sure that the right support for teachers is there. But at the same time, of course, we have to address these things in the short-term term, the urgent things, but also we have to go to the medium, long-term things. And then what is clear is that we have to take stock of what we learned during the crisis. It was a strong hit. We all were shaking. We were not ready. But the education systems around the world have done a lot to cope the situation and to move forward and to learn. And so I think it's extremely important that we don't lose what we've learned. We take advantage of what we learn as we are moving forward. So for example, we were forced to introduce ICT in education in a very short term. Maybe we were not ready for that. But now we have to take advantage of that. Recently, I was in the Maldives, and they were very proud that Google has congratulated them because they have 80% of their teachers certified in Google Classroom. And so that seems that, of course, this happened because of the pandemic, and that has created a nice capacity in their education system as they move forward. Similar things have happened in other countries. So let's take advantage of that, make sure that we take advantage of how we have invested. For example, GPE, the organization where I work, we have supported many countries on providing students tablets, computers, and to address and actually develop contents for the tablets, computers, but also for TV programs. So we have to be sure that we take advantage of that as we start our new normal. We also have to address how to change the attitude of students and teachers to deal with the education process if this type of crisis start again. And actually, this also was one of the requirements of the ideas that I got from this recent trip to Maldives, that education practitioners were complaining that education was not a priority, and people did not understand the urgency of making sure that kids continue learning, and they feel frustrated. They say that, for example, some books could not reach some islands because that island was in quarantine, and according to the quarantines rules, education materials could not go. And I mean, of course, there are differences between health and education, but in a way they felt that the restrictions on education were far too severe given the urgency of making sure that kids don't lose a day of learning because it's a day that will never come back. And also in the medium term, long term, we have to ensure an adequate funding to the sector. We have to ensure that a proper 20% of the budget, like in the case of Indonesia, is allocated to education to keep the capacity of the education system to deliver and to prepare for this new normal. And also it's important that financial aid remains strong in the education sector. So maybe just to finalize, what G20 intervention could be on the topic. And first of all, let me start with this big reminder that loss of learning today will then intensify risks to economic development, food security, peace, stability, and climate change for generations to come. So that's a very strong statement, and we have not to forget that. And even though, as I said, the impact will come in 10 to 20 years, but the impact will be there. And so the world will be looking to the G20 for comprehensive steps to recover from the COVID-19 pandemic and other global emergency. The G20 can play a critical role in ensuring continued focus on investment to transforming education system. And let me just stop a little bit here. Transforming education systems is very important because we were already in a crisis. Countries were in the education sector. So in a way, we have this crisis within a crisis, and so we don't only need education systems do not only need to deal with the COVID emergency and the learning recovery, but also need to deal with the low levels of learning that were already happening. So. And G20 can promote smarter, innovative mechanisms that make their dollars go further and minimize inefficient spending with equity. So what we were trying to hear is like, okay, it's good that hopefully that G20 provides more resources to education in their countries and in the developing world, but at the same time, make sure that you do it in a way that promotes efficiency within this country so you get the best for each dollar you invest. And finally, G20, of course, can keep supporting countries to expand the fiscal space for education investment. No? Here, well, basically, I'm saying that more financial aid will be coming into the education sector. And thank you.
Thank you very much, Javier, for your bold emphasis on the G20 intervention to make sure that we can accelerate learning recovery process and reducing the widening quality educational gaps, and to ensure the recommendation for short-term and practical short-term addressing learning loss, as well as the long-term, medium and long-term recommendations to use the momentum of post-pandemic recovery as an opportunity, a momentum to build resilient education system can be realized. Ladies and gentlemen, we have listened to important topics, starting with the trends of inequality and well-being, and then the recommendation to strengthen the skills in race with the technology, and then the proposals on how to accelerate learning. Now, I would like to invite our last speaker, Pak Elan, to discuss social protection. Pak Elan Satriawan is an economist with significant experience in both academic and policy-making areas. In academic, he has done extensive research covering topics in development microeconomic areas, particularly in impact evaluation and effectiveness of anti-poverty and social programs, poverty-related issues, including health, education, and interlinkage between the two. In policy areas, Pak Elan leads a high-profile government policy think tank to advise the Vice President in taking the strategic policy decisions on poverty alleviation and social development. He has extensive knowledge in conducting monitoring and evaluation, as well as using the knowledge generated from the research for policy advocacy, capacity building, and knowledge management. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our speaker, Pak Elan, who will elaborate beyond COVID-19 towards more responsive, inclusive, and sustainable social protection. Pak Elan, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Moderator, for very kind introduction. And it's good to hear that the Moderator says the stage is yours, because I think we've been hearing in the last 2 years is the Zoom is yours. Okay, so what I'm going to talk is about the post-pandemic social protection, making it toward more responsive, inclusive, and sustainable ones. And while what I'm going to talk is going to focus largely on Indonesian case, but I think in many part of Indonesian experience, insight, it will be relevant to many of the G20 countries. So when the pandemic hit countries, globals, Indonesia, like many other countries, expand its social protection to protect the people from falling to the poverty. And the way that the government of Indonesia did is through at least 3 things, at least the 3 policy actions. One is by utilizing the existing programs, because this is the one that already been available, will be quickly deployed to reach actually the ones that are affected by the pandemics. So what the government did with this existing program is expanding the programs to reach more beneficiaries. Some of the program like add the beneficiaries perhaps like few 100,000, others even also a few millions beneficiaries. And it's not just the adding to the or expanding the program coverage, like what the government did with the program Sembako or the Indonesian CCT, the program Keluarga Harapan, program Indonesia Pintar, but the government also increased the benefit size of these programs. Programs like the electricity subsidy, government not just increased the coverage, but also increased the size of the subsidy for the beneficiaries actually to pay less compared to what they did pre-pandemic. Third, government also introduced the new programs because knowing that there are many new households that affected by the pandemic, they're not in database, there are multiple new forms of the vulnerabilities. So government also introduced some new programs. Programs like the Kartu Prakerja, programs like village cash transfer. These are among the new programs that the government hope will will provide the protection to the new poor or to the new vulnerable household who are not yet in the government database. So overall, during this pandemic in the last 2 years, government expand like perhaps the coverage of the program from like around 30% the bottom population to like close to 60% of the bottom population. So almost double coverage in terms of the number of the household covered by these programs. Also, with the increase of the program coverage, then government also spent unprecedented budget. In the last 3 years, government of Indonesia at least spend like more than double what they did in the compared to the pre-pandemic periods. As you can see on the right graph, the budget spent by the government on the social protection jumped from like slightly less than 100 trillion to more than 250 trillion, and it's been consistent in the last 3 years. And in terms of the budget, in terms of compared to the total budget of the total APBN, the public budget, it's been like close to between 9 to 10%. While in terms of the relative to the total GDP, Indonesia probably for the first time reached like 1.5% of the total GDP on the social protection spending, what then other country peers in the middle income group on average did. But despite these unprecedented policy measures to cope with the extraordinary crisis, so there remain some issues in our social protection programs to address. Just to mention some, that while there's been like a double in coverage, but there is an analysis using the national representative data shows that there's still some poor and vulnerable household that still not getting the programs, not covered by the government programs. And this partly because of the government, the quality of the program implementation, but also another reason is because of the lack of the beneficiary data updating. The government has been like established the beneficiary data since 2011, But in the last 3 or 4 years, there are some issues on this beneficiary data updating, resulting on the high inclusion and exclusion errors. And also there is even while we have like the program that so-called social assistance, well, many ministries actually did manage this program, but there are still some groups, particularly like people with disability and elderly group, that not still getting these programs, because the 2 programs that cover these people with disability and elderly are simply too small to cover those in these vulnerable groups. There's also issues on the absence of the responses system to deal with the anticipated shocks. So what it takes then to establish a more comprehensive, inclusive, and more sustainable social protection programs. We list some of the agenda for Indonesia to do, but I think this is also relevant for many G20 countries. One is to develop a comprehensive beneficiary database. And when we discuss, when we're establishing a comprehensive beneficiary database, it's important, I think we need to go beyond what is many countries actually usually do, just relying on the survey data, but go beyond that and then utilizing also like a spatial, administrative data, making sure interconnectivity across different database, things like that. Also on the making sure that this beneficiary data have like a dynamic updating, a regular dynamic updating to capture the rapid welfare change. Equip it with the on-demand application when people can submit the grievance or can submit actually the can register actually into the system, as well as welcome the inputs from the community from the bottom. Second, expanding the social protection to some marginalized group. Particularly in Indonesia, we already have the program that support the elderly and also the people with disability, but it's been years, more than a decade, that the people actually stick with the very small coverage. We don't have yet also a program that support or protect the at-risk informal workers, despite the Indonesia labor market that mostly close to 60% of this Indonesia labor market actually are informal workers. Third is the establishing adaptive social protection. This should go beyond like putting or pulling all the programs, but also making sure and ensuring the institutional strengthening and partnership. In an Indonesia context, many different programs managed by different line ministries. So we need to making sure the better coordination across different line ministries, even goes beyond the ministries that manage the programs, the social protection program, but also involving the agencies that deal with the weather, the natural disaster, etc. Also, pay some efforts in some analytic works to be able to anticipate the impact anticipate the shocks and its impact to the many vulnerable groups as well as the poor in Indonesia. And if we have that kind of the information, then we need to make sure that we can advocate this into a better into the planning and budgeting that can adopt the information, the needs actually to capture the future shocks, including disaster, economic shocks, or shocks like pandemic that we are facing now. Fourth, promoting the inclusive delivery mechanisms. Most of the Indonesia social protection programs now based on the debit card, which is I think which is good actually for the financial inclusion purposive, but many poor, many vulnerable households, they are not really, many of them actually have the constraint on KYC. They don't have like they don't have the official ID, they don't have the official card that bank requires actually for them to have the debit card. So moving from the card-based to the biometric-based benefit disbursement is one thing that is important to do. Transitioning also in kind to the cash-based social protection is another thing to do to make sure that everyone then can pick whatever, can use the benefit for whatever they need, instead of stick with what the in-kind that government give to them. Also utilizing the right technology to reach everyone. And last but not the least, promoting the sustainability of social protection financing. For the case of Indonesia, where the tax base is still under 10%, it's hard to think that we're going to sustain with the social protection financing in the last 10 years. So create more fiscal space by expanding the country tax ratio is a must. Also consolidate and integrate similar social protection program to improve efficiency is another important agenda. And also in the case of Indonesia is quite relevant. Most of the energy subsidy still based on the commodity subsidy. Reforming this from the commodity subsidy toward like a more targeted subsidy is the way actually to save the fiscal space, but also to make sure that the subsidy actually can reach the right beneficiaries. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pak Elan, for your forward-looking vision to develop comprehensive, inclusive, and sustainable social protection system through 5 recommendations you mentioned there. And you have underlined that your recommendation will likely to address the gap in the current existing social assistance program in Indonesia, which not yet include people with disability as well as the poor and at-risk elderly. Most importantly, the recommendation will be very important to develop a responsive system to deal with an anticipated shock, which is currently still absent. Thank you very much for all speakers. Now we will have 10 minutes to have Q&A. We are actually a bit run out of our time, but I would like to ask you to allow us to extend for 10 minutes from now to allow us to have questions and answers from the audience. I'd like to ask audience here to have one question first, and please raise your hand and say your name and your institution and your question, who you would like to ask to. Thank you. Yes, Pak, please.
Yes, thank you, moderator. Hi, panelists. I'm Rexon Silaban from Labor 20. So I address this question to Ibu Alatas and Pak Elan. First, Ibu Alatas, very fascinating presentation. Nice to meet you again. Have a long time don't see. My question is about the new habit of the young people to move one job to another job. They are not consistent in the career. They like go to the passion. In our age, whatever the problem, we continue to keep the job because we have responsibility to the family, to other people. But now my children said, I will follow my passion. I don't care about the money. I like the job that's make me happy and make me connected to the people. But this is, I think, will be dangerous to my mind if they keep moving to another job with uncertainties future. What do you think this problem? This is the positive or negative to make young people to more professional, more committed to the one job and so on. And to Pak Elan, just quick. Thanks also for the presentation. My problem here is Indonesia will promise in the law will have the universal coverage in 2029 or social protection and social security. But you explained about the data problem, yeah, highly inclusion, and then some people not targeted inside, and then people have to do some number of the ID, and then what do you think the possibility for the 2029 universal coverage target? Is it possible Indonesia reach the target? Because even I was working in the social security before as the commissioner, till now from the 60 million people should be covered by social security employment, only active 33 million. It has been supported on the many institutions, government involved, and others. So please, whether this target will be achieved. Thank you.
Thank you for your question. Bu Vivi, I would like to invite you to answer the question, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Pak Rekson. It's nice to meet you here again after several years, ya Pak. Your question is a very valid question, especially millennial, Gen Z have a different kind of pattern of career. You asked about whether it is positive or negative. I think it can be positive, it can be negative. Depends on when and why they move from one career to another career. If indeed from one career to another career is an upper skill improvement, they already acquired enough skill and they would like to gain more from the next steps of their life, it could be a positive one. But at the same time, when it is because of like less persistence or inability to cope with tensions or inability to cope with conflict within, it can be dangerous because it's most likely they might not really have enough tacit knowledge that makes them able to grow. And this also have an implication in social protections overall, because like, of course, like at the end, you want to make sure like there is coverage on later on for old age or pensions, how to ensure that the social protection actually cater to this kind of like behavior. There is also another type of movement, Pak, which is and more you have freelancer, which is not really wedded with one employer. This is the kind of challenge that countries like Indonesia and a lot of countries, probably some other countries already knows how to do it, but it's still, I think it is a lot of challenge in terms of like how to ensure you give protections when you don't have like this enough long relationship between employer and employee.
Thank you, Bu Vivi. I would like to invite Pak Elan to answer the question, the second one.
Thank you, Pak Rekson, for a very important question. I think the issues that you just said is something that on the agenda, one of the important agenda within the government. So, and it is beyond the data issues, because I think when it comes to covering those that in the informal sector, for example, many of them, if not majority of them, actually are already on the government database. Right now, the government has a database to target for the social assistance program, what is called as DTKS, managed under the Ministry of Social Affairs. But also, there is a new database to target the extreme poverty managed by Menko PMK. And as I said, when it comes to informal sectors, so I think we can ensure that they are actually in this database. But for them to make sure actually for this informal sector, labor, and many of them are in the, particularly those that in the like bottom 40 or 50%, to be included in the social security system, we need another efforts. This is the same, for the health, it's probably already been solved partially because the government has a program called the PBI-JKN, as you know, where the government paid the premium of this, the social health insurance for at least, I think around now 98 point something million individuals. But the government doesn't have yet the similar scheme for the labor protection or worker protection, employment protection for these informal sectors. So they're not in the system of on the BPJS Ketenagakerjaan yet, right? So I think the challenge is, one is to how to make the interconnectivity across this database between the social assistant database, social assistant beneficiary database, where many of these social workers, partly those that consider poor and vulnerable, are already in there, with those that managed by the BPJS, the employment BPJS. But that's only half of the solution. Another things that need to be done, once they're in database, how to mobilize them to encourage them actually to be part of this social security system. For the government, it's can be perhaps in the short term to pay them, but in the long term, definitely actually to encourage them to participate by paying actually their part. Thank you.
Thank you, Pak Elan. We have several questions from our online audience, but due to the time, I have asked the event organizer to additional 10 minutes before, and we almost there. I will give one question for Dennis first from the audience, online audience, who asked you about is number of institutions in social and solidarity economy as defined by the ILO has any relevance to measure solidarity? Why do you think are the reasons that the richest has more in-country solidarity than the poor in rich country? This probably another way around in developing country, just a hypothesis. This is from Tendi Gunawan. While you're preparing your answer, there is another question for Javier. Do we see space for private education? Experience shows private schools adapted to COVID better and faster. Moreover, privately funded education seems to bring better results and accountability. And then the last one for Pak Asep. From Joanna Crawford, Equality Insights International Women's Development Agency, how will the T20 and Task Force 5 promote the policy briefs and the specific recommendation from those briefs and these presentations to the G20 from here? For example, is the T20 going to engage with Sherpas, country partners, look to integrate relevant recommendations into draft of the G20 communique? There has been such a lot of great work facilitated by the T20 Indonesia team. How will this be connected to the G20 deliberations and outcomes? 1 minute each, please. Maybe you want to start, Dennis. Thank you.
Yes, and I hope I understood the question right. So, with regard to indicators produced by other institutions, the answer is yes, it's very relevant because we do not measure that ourselves, but we rather look for proxies and indicators from other institutions who can help us improve that measurement of solidarity and agency. And the reason for why we observe such low levels of solidarities in the lower income quintiles, I think that was the question, that is to be analyzed. What is clear, I think, is that it's not a perfect correlation between income and solidarity. So it's, but rather we see that in the upper groups of the income distribution, solidarity is comparatively high, and only in the lower end, it's much below the average. And this is worrying, and I cannot say right now why that is the case, but it is certainly something that policymakers should have on their minds.
Okay. Thank you, Dennis. Pak Asep, would you like to Next one.
Yeah, I think as the structures of G20 show that T20 is part of the official engagement groups of the G20, and we are under the SHERPA of G20. So all of our recommendation will go through the SHERPA, and that will be delivered by the T20 chairs. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Pak Asep. Javier, please.
Well, thanks. With regard to private education, well, first of all, let me see, like, education is everyone's business, no? And part of what we have learned in the COVID pandemic is that some of the spaces where kids were supposed to learn beyond school were not active, no? So, again, education is everyone's business. And with regard especially on private education, I think there are good experiences from where we can learn, but there are also some bad experiences that also can teach us. And at the end of the day, well, I think it's like each country, according to its own institutional arrangements, should decide on what type of engagement that they do with the private sector, what type of public-private partnership can be established to ensure that the quality of education the quality of education is good and access is widely provided.
Thank you, Javier. Ladies and gentlemen, we had a very fruitful discussion today, but it is the time to end our session. May I summarize our discussion and there are 4 points I have written here. That first, the alarming trends of inequality and well-being in the post-pandemic world require urgent actions beyond the previously designed policies and programs. In terms of skills, the increasing idleness of youth and the loss of learning today will intensify the risk to economic development and other aspects for generations to come, as highlighted by Bu Vivi and Javier. And then the gap in the existing social security that not include the most vulnerable groups and disability also require alternative approach for social security that can stand the crisis. So innovations and alternative approach to the new challenge at the system level might be key for successful and just transition to prevent the rising inequalities, to strengthen the human capital and well-being, and making sure no one left behind. The actions to address the challenge, such as on-skilled human capital supports and accelerating learning, requires joint hand between beyond conventional multilateral or bilateral cooperation. The G20 leaders are expected to take comprehensive steps, as mentioned by our speakers. Continuing investment for education, for example, mentioned by Javier, promoting smarter and innovative mechanisms, and also further innovative and transformative social protections. Finally, the vision to build the responsive, inclusive, and sustainable social protection is ambitious, but it is super important. And significant investment and concrete actions, starting with the willingness of the G20 leaders to invest in this critical area, will become a key to achieve this visionary goal. Ladies and gentlemen, we have come to the end of the session. In the whole session, we have been very seriously rethinking about inequality, human capital, and well-being in our post-pandemic world's future. Please allow me to end our session by sharing a bit fun part of Indonesian-style meeting with a cultural introduction to Pantun, 4 lines rhyme short poem. I will do it in English. Nusa Dua sky full of flying eagle. Never seen such a beauty even in a picture. Post-pandemic world is full of struggle. We work together for strong, inclusive, and sustainable future. Honorable speakers and distinguished participants, on behalf of the SMERU Research Institute and the Task Force 5, I would like to extend our gratitude for the support and collaborations from T20 Indonesia chairs and secretariat, Task Force 5 co-chairs, Asian Development Bank, and Tanoto Foundation. Thank you for attending today's event and for the collaboration. See you next time. Thank you very much.